Every year, the New Humanitarian publishes its much shared list of 10 crises that demand your attention now. This list highlights the places in the world where needs are rising, aid budgets are cut or insufficient, and where people feel forgotten by the international community. Over the coming months, our series of first-person stories will feature aid workers and people affected in one of the places on the 10 crisis list. In this episode, after 25 years as an international humanitarian worker, Susana Raffalli returns to Venezuela only to find herself at the center of a humanitarian, political, and economic crisis in her own backyard. She describes the devastating impact that 10 years of crisis has had on Venezuelans and argues that the Latin American country has been largely neglected by the international aid sector.
I am Susana Raffalli. I am a humanitarian practitioner based now in Venezuela, which is my home country. When I came back to Venezuela from a long period working overseas as a humanitarian personnel, at that moment, 2012, there were a lot of tension, especially political tensions. I started to see the scarcity, and at that moment, between 2012 and 2014, for me, it was the initiation, starting of a protracted crisis. We ran out of food, sanitary napkins, medicines. It was so difficult to find anything at that moment. Venezuela at that moment didn't have a strong tradition of humanitarian work. As a middle-income country, we managed to manage our own emergencies without the international mechanism. So because of that, there were no humanitarian personnel in country. By the other hand, we have the UN agencies with more of experience working in emergencies, but without no intention of supporting the idea that we were entering into a humanitarian crisis. When I faced the situation of, talking to donors and talking to international agencies, showing the situation, giving them some figures, and they didn't trust us. They just stayed quiet until the money started to flow to Venezuela, and for us was very frustrated. I need to organize my life according to the water supply, trying to get power banks at home for getting electricity for working. And I remember when the scarcity of gas was so high, it was so heavy for us, and we asked the international agencies, the UN, why don't you come to our office? We don't have gas, and we don't have $2-3 for paying a parking lot in your compound. Basic issues like constraints of the everyday life, to move around, to get electricity, to have water. And we are so tired of living on the edge always. Can you imagine the volunteers from Caritas, the people down there in the field? They ask me all the time, Doctora, when we are going to finish, And it's so frustrated for us not to see the end of these processes. Venezuelans who are doing humanitarian work, we need to face our own humanitarian situation at home without any resources and coping with the same amount of work. It was so difficult for me, to see and take care after my sisters and my mom without medicines. Can you imagine crossing the border to Colombia to buy the chemo for my sister and coming back? Is too big. I can say this from the first-hand experience, that the system was working better 10 years ago. So I am so frustrated to see such a huge declining of the humanitarian ethics and the humanitarian values in my own country, facing my own emergency. Knowing and understanding what localization means, to see that we are one of the worst testimonies of localization in Venezuela is very, very frustrating. At the beginning, nobody trusts us. There is no credibility at all on our SOS. And now we have the whole ecosystem of international agencies working here. Many of these international agencies came and asked for a lot of money for strengthening the capacities of local NGOs, and that was not the case. It's a huge devaluation of the humanitarian system, what I have seen here in Venezuela. This has been very, very shocking for me and very frustrating. After the C-19 pandemic, Venezuela started to disappear from the media. After being one of the 10 worst food crises in the world, how can you say that in that country nothing is happening? We started to disappear from the humanitarian forecast, from the news, and also the humanitarian issue is no longer in the diplomatic agenda. The capacity to gather humanitarian funds has been declining. In 2020, we managed maybe to gather 80% of the budget for the humanitarian response plan, and now it's declining and declining. Now it's 2024, almost half of the year, and we didn't manage to capture not even 10% of the budget for the humanitarian response plan, which is a clear indication that Venezuela is no longer prioritized. Still, there are pockets of population facing huge humanitarian needs. Countries, donors, international agencies, they know that there is a political crisis, but the humanitarian needs, it's my personal opinion, are started to be neglected again. For me, losing visibility, losing information, and losing funds is a clear indication of becoming a neglected and very soon a forgotten crisis. The situation is worse. After 10 years of facing humanitarian needs, of facing scarcity, of facing economical pressures, we don't even have a currency. So the people is coping on a very precarious, informal income, engaging in unsafe and unsustainable coping strategies, or based on remittances. And that is not a sustainable way of living for a country. It's to see the slow breakdown of a full society without being able to stop this. And we, the humanitarian body of the country, is dealing not only with the hungry, but also with complex situations like human trafficking, drugs, alcoholism. If we don't keep a core support to the humanitarian needs that still pockets of population is facing, the outmigration will be massive. We need to keep the visibility of the humanitarian needs in Venezuela, not only because of this destitution of a huge amount of population, but because if the international community don't support us, this will be an emergency in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, and all over.
Susana Raffalli is a nutritionist and advisor to Caritas Venezuela. Visit thenewhumanitarian.org to read the full list of 10 crises that you should pay attention to this year. The New Humanitarian is the only newsroom that specializes in covering humanitarian crises. Subscribe to our feed to stay in the loop with the new episodes from different parts of the world. This episode was produced and edited by Melissa Fundira, sound engineering by Mark Nieto, and original music by Whitney Patterson.